If you keep buying expensive cleaners and garden products every season, you may be wasting money without even knowing it. I used to do exactly the same thing because every bottle on the store shelf promised an easier life and better results. The strange part was that my wallet kept getting lighter while the problems kept coming back. Mold appeared again, garden tools started rusting, seedlings struggled after planting. Even simple stains around the house seemed to need another expensive product. One day, an older neighbor looked at my growing pile of bottles and smiled. He asked me why I kept paying for things that one small brown bottle could already do. I honestly thought he was joking until he showed me how he used ordinary 3% hydrogen peroxide in ways I had never even imagined. Since then, I have looked at that little bottle very differently because it quietly replaced several products I used to buy every year. I am not saying it is magic because it is not. It cannot solve every problem, and it should always be used carefully and only where it makes sense. But I can tell you from my own experience that it helped me save money while making many everyday jobs much simpler. Most people only know hydrogen peroxide as something for small cuts or first aid. That is exactly why they miss so many practical uses around the home and garden. I was one of those people for years. The funny thing is that many older gardeners learned these simple tricks long before store shelves became full of colorful bottles with high prices and fancy labels. They preferred simple solutions that were easy to find and easy to afford. That way of thinking stayed with them because it worked. Today, I want to share those lessons with you exactly the way they were shared with me. We will go step by step without rushing, and I will tell you where hydrogen peroxide can really help and where you should not expect miracles. Some of these little habits may surprise you, and one of them completely changed the way I start young plants every growing season. That simple method is probably the one I wish someone had shown me 30 years earlier. I remember thinking that if something cost more, it had to work better, but over the years, I learned that many expensive products simply do one small job, while a simple bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide can often help with several everyday tasks when it is used the right way. The biggest mistake most people make is believing that every problem needs a different chemical. One bottle for the bathroom, another for garden tools, another for seed starting, another for cleaning flower pots. Before long, the shelf is full and the wallet is empty. I was doing exactly that without asking myself whether there was an easier way. An older gardener once told me that every dollar you save on unnecessary products is another dollar you can spend on better seeds, fresh compost, or a fruit tree that will feed your family for years. That simple sentence stayed with me because it made perfect sense. I also noticed something else. Many people clean things only after the problem becomes serious. They wait until pots are covered with green stains or tools are spotted with rust or seed trays develop mold. Then they buy stronger and stronger cleaners hoping for a quick fix. Most of the time, they are treating the result instead of preventing the problem in the first place. That is where simple habits make such a big difference. I started spending just a few extra minutes before putting garden tools away or before planting seedlings, and those little routines saved me hours later in the season. Very few people do this because they think prevention is boring, but experienced gardeners know it is one of the cheapest ways to make life easier. I am not interested in filling my shed with expensive bottles anymore. I would rather understand why a problem starts and stop it before it grows into something bigger. That approach has helped me more than any advertisement ever did. In the next part, I want to show you the first practical use that completely changed how I prepare items around the house and garden before the season even begins. It looks almost too simple to matter, but after you see how much time and money it can save, you may never look at that small brown bottle the same way again. I still remember the first time I decided to stop throwing away old plastic pots every spring. Most of them looked dirty and tired with white mineral marks, green patches, and bits of old soil stuck to the sides. Years ago, I would have bought new ones because they looked cleaner, and I thought fresh pots meant healthier plants. Then an old gardener showed me something that completely changed my routine. He filled a bucket with water, added a small amount of 3% hydrogen peroxide, and let the empty pots soak for a while before giving them a light scrub. It was not difficult and it did not take expensive products. The pots came out looking much cleaner and ready for another season. Since then, I have done the same thing every year because I would rather spend a few minutes cleaning than spend money replacing perfectly good containers. The same idea works with seed trays, small hand tools, and many plastic garden items that collect dirt after months outside. I always clean away loose soil first because that makes the rest of the job much easier. Then I use the peroxide solution as part of the cleaning process before everything goes back into storage or gets used again. It has become one of those quiet habits that nobody notices until they ask why my equipment lasts so many years. Most people skip this step because they are eager to start planting as quickly as possible. I understand that feeling because spring always makes us impatient, but I learned many years ago that a little preparation saves much bigger problems later. It also gives me a chance to inspect every pot, every tray, and every tool before I begin using them again. Sometimes I find a cracked container that needs replacing, or a loose handle that only takes a minute to tighten. Those small jobs are much easier now than when the garden is full of growing plants, and every spare minute is already spoken for. That is one lesson I never forgot, because simple preparation usually costs almost nothing, while fixing neglected problems later often costs much more. There is another old habit I picked up not long after this one, and it involves something that almost every gardener does during planting season without realizing they may be making a very common mistake. Once I understood that simple change, my young plants began the season with a much stronger start, and that is exactly what I want to show you next. One of the best lessons I ever learned was that healthy plants usually begin before they ever touch the garden soil. Most people take a seedling out of its container and plant it as quickly as possible because they are afraid the roots will dry out. I used to do exactly the same thing until an older gardener watched me one spring and quietly asked why I was rushing. He told me that a calm start often gives a stronger finish. That day, he showed me a simple trick that has stayed with me ever since. Before planting, he prepared a bucket of clean water and added a small amount of 3% hydrogen peroxide. He explained that the solution could be used to help clean the surface of the root ball and refresh the planting water before the seedlings went into the ground. I watched him place each young plant into the bucket for a short time while he prepared the planting holes. There was no hurry and no complicated process. Everything felt simple and practical. Since then, I have followed a similar routine every season. While the seedlings are waiting, I inspect every one of them carefully. I remove damaged leaves. I check for weak stems. I look for anything that does not seem healthy because it is much easier to solve a small problem before planting than after the garden is full. Very few people spend those extra minutes because they are excited to get everything into the ground. I understand that feeling very well, but experience has taught me that patience at the beginning often saves disappointment later. I also pay close attention to the containers the seedlings came from. If I plan to reuse them next year, I clean them before putting them away, instead of letting old soil dry on the surface for months. These little habits may not look impressive, but together they become part of a routine that saves both time and money. I no longer believe that success comes from buying more products. I believe it comes from paying closer attention to small details that many people overlook. Those details slowly build stronger plants and a more enjoyable gardening season. The next habit surprised me even more because it had nothing to do with planting itself. It was about something almost every gardener does after watering, without realizing that one simple change can make many everyday garden jobs easier throughout the entire season. One habit that saved me more time than I expected had nothing to do with planting or harvesting. It started after a long afternoon working in the garden when I noticed my pruning shears were becoming harder to use. The blades looked dull even though they had been sharpened only a few weeks earlier. Then I realized they were covered with sticky plant sap and tiny bits of dirt that I had ignored for far too long. Years ago, I probably would have left them that way until they became a real problem. Instead, I remembered something an experienced gardener showed me many seasons before. He would wipe his tools clean after every busy day and use a little 3% hydrogen peroxide as part of that simple cleaning routine before drying everything carefully. It was never about making the tools look shiny. It was about taking care of the things that took care of the garden. I began doing the same with my pruners, small trowels, planting knives, and even the handles of buckets that seemed to collect grime over time. It only took a few extra minutes, but I noticed the difference season after season. My tools stayed in better condition, and I replaced them much less often. That alone saved more money than I expected. Most people wait until something breaks before giving it attention, but old gardeners often think differently. They know that regular care is usually cheaper than buying something new. The same idea applies around the house. I started using the same careful approach on small garden work surfaces, plastic watering cans, and reusable spray bottles after emptying them for the season. Keeping everything clean before storing it made spring much easier because I could begin working immediately instead of spending the first warm weekend washing neglected equipment. Very few people talk about these quiet habits because they are not exciting and they do not promise instant results. Still, they are the kind of routines that slowly make life easier year after year. I have found that saving money is often less about finding one amazing trick and more about building several simple habits that work together. There is one final lesson I want to share because it brings all these small ideas into one practical way of thinking. It is probably the biggest reason I no longer feel the need to fill my shed with expensive products every gardening season. Over the years, I have realized that the biggest reward was never the money I saved, even though that certainly added up. The real reward was the confidence that came from knowing I did not have to run to the store every time a small problem appeared. I stopped depending on a shelf full of expensive products because I learned to solve many everyday jobs with a few simple routines and one inexpensive bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide used carefully and only where it made sense. That change also made gardening feel less stressful. Instead of reacting to every little issue, I began preventing many of them before they had a chance to grow into something larger. I noticed that my reusable pots lasted longer. My hand tools stayed cleaner and easier to use. My seed trays were always ready for another season. Even the small jobs around the house became easier because I already had a simple routine instead of wondering which special cleaner I needed this time. Very few people think this way anymore because modern life encourages us to buy another product for every new problem. I understand why, because I followed that same path myself for many years. Then I discovered that many older gardeners preferred to keep things simple. They believed that if something worked well, there was no reason to replace it with a more expensive option. That way of thinking slowly changed my entire approach to gardening and everyday life. I became more patient. I paid closer attention to small details. I learned that regular care often prevents bigger problems later. None of these habits are difficult, and none of them require expensive equipment. They simply require consistency. That is the part most people overlook. They try something once and expect instant results, while experienced gardeners quietly repeat the same simple habits year after year. Those habits become almost automatic until they are simply part of everyday life. Looking back, I wish I had learned these lessons much earlier, because they would have saved me a great deal of money and unnecessary work. There is one final thought I always share with friends when they ask why I still keep that little brown bottle on my shelf. It is not because I believe it is a miracle solution. It is because it reminds me that the simplest methods are often the ones we forget first, and remembering them can change the way we care for both our gardens and our homes. When I look back at all the years I have spent working around my home and garden, I realize the biggest lesson was never about one special product. It was about changing the way I think. I stopped believing that every problem needed an expensive solution and started asking a much simpler question. Is there an easier way that has already worked for ordinary people for many years? That single question helped me save money season after season, and it also made gardening far more enjoyable. 3% hydrogen peroxide became one of those useful little things that always had a place on my shelf because it could help with several everyday jobs when used carefully and for the right purpose. I never expected it to replace everything because no product can do that. Instead, it became part of a simple routine that focused on keeping things clean, preparing equipment before problems appeared, and giving young plants a better start whenever possible. Those small habits slowly replaced many expensive purchases that I once believed were necessary. The best part is that none of these ideas require special skills or complicated equipment. They are easy to repeat and they fit naturally into everyday life. That is probably why they have been passed from one gardener to another for so many years. I still smile when friends ask why I keep buying the same inexpensive brown bottle instead of filling my garage with colorful cleaners and specialty products. I simply tell them that I learned long ago to value practical results more than impressive labels. The garden has taught me that steady habits usually beat expensive shortcuts. If one simple routine saves a little money today and another saves a little more next month, those small savings become surprisingly meaningful over the years. More importantly, they leave you with confidence because you know how to solve many everyday problems without depending on another trip to the store. I hope at least one of these simple ideas finds a place in your own home or garden, because that is exactly how old knowledge survives. One person shares it with another, and little by little those forgotten habits become useful once again. And I can promise you this, once you begin looking for simple, practical solutions, you will start noticing many more hidden lessons that have been quietly waiting around you all along.